In Psalm 19, we see God's ordering. God's ordering is the bringing together, the integration of creation with all of our lives. God creates the heavens and earth to tell of God's glory. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament shows God's glory. God's glory is reflected in all of God's creating. We, created beings, are not exempt from reflecting God's glory. This is why the law has been given to us. The law of the Lord is perfect. God's law is intended to revive us. The statutes of the Lord are just. They give joy to our hearts. The fear of the Lord is clean. It endures forever. The Lord's judgments are true and righteous. All of this is desirous. All of this is more desirable than gold, fine gold. It is sweeter than honey in the comb. God's law is intended to revive us, to restore us, not to harm us. The law is meant to keep us close to God, as God desires us to be. Though we may not be perfect, for who can tell how often one causes grief to another, there is trust and there is forgiveness. Cleanse me from covering up my missteps. Keep me from foolhardiness. Don't let my arrogance get in the way, so that I may be whole and sound, so that I may be innocent of great offenses. Then I can rely on God completely. Let the words of my mouth and the self-examination of my heart be favorable to you. Lord, you are the one that is strong as a rock. You are my rescuer. See how the psalmist takes us through nature to discovering our true nature. This is like the experience of a Lenten pilgrimage that moves us forward. During Lent, we see how we turn toward God, and when we do so, God more fully equips us, and we are more fully capable of receiving, to living out God's code for our lives. When we turn to God and God's way, we find that we get caught up in that which sustains the universe. Imagine that. We join with all that cooperates with God's nature. The same God that sustains the universe sustains each of us. Notice how the psalmist makes no mention of a split between a physical or a spiritual life, how what we experience in this life is both as created beings together by living the gift of our one necessarily in opposition to one another. They coexist in the here and now. What often gets separated through sin is actually one life, our life in God. This is what Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin says. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. The psalmist knows something about that. So does the writer of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. All things were made through the Word. nothing is made without the Word. In the Word is the light of life. This is the same light that is in each of us. We could not have life without the Word, who is the source of life. God did not send the Word, this light, God's Son, to condemn. God sent the Word, this light, God's Son, to restore the world, to restore us, to restore to all the true nature that God created in it. This is what Jesus' life and work is about, restoring us to our true natures. This begins with the restoration of the temple. In John's Gospel, the ministry of Jesus begins with the cleansing of the temple, and John tells us why in the verses that follow immediately after the ones in today's Gospel. John writes, "Because of what Jesus did at that Passover celebration, many believed in his name," Jesus' goal, so that many will believe. Jesus does what he does so that we might believe. But John goes on to say, Jesus did not trust himself to them fully because he knows people. Jesus did not need anyone to tell him about human nature, for Jesus knows what human nature is. In other words, Jesus not only knows what human nature is, he also knows it's his business to restore it. His business is to restore human nature to its deepest truth, its deepest intention, that is God's. Jesus does so by offering himself in order to show himself to be raised again. The Divine One offers himself up so that we may know how to offer ourselves, how we may know ourselves to be one with God. This is what atonement means. Atonement, at one with. Jesus makes us at one with God. It is that through Jesus we are made as one. You might recall the verse from the Good Friday hymn, Ah, Holy Jesus, that says, "All that I have this way. Lo, the Good Shepherd offered for the sheep. The slave hath sinned, and the servant suffered for our atonement," our at-one-ment. While we nothing heeded, it is God who interceded. It is God's providence alone that completes creation's story. God fills the gaps of what we can't know fully. God does this so we may know more fully and understand what we can. The temple system had gone awry. The high priest Caiaphas recently moved the market from outside the temple to inside. What was being sold were animals that were bought to be presented for sacrifice. This was the practice of the day for becoming cleansed from one's sin. Break one of God's laws, change your money from Roman to Jewish so that the emperor is bypassed in your transaction with God. Buy an animal at the temple market. Present your animal in the temple to be sacrificed by the priest on your behalf. You could never get out of this cycle. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So when Jesus cleanses the temple, he shows that he has come to cleanse the unjustness and corruption of human hearts, of human systems, He did this for the good of us. Jesus completes God's providential work of fulfilling creation's story. Jesus completes the old cycle once and forever. As John says, Jesus' disciples will remember that statement, "Passion for your house consumes me." What they're remembering are the words from Psalm 69. "I have become a stranger to my own brothers, an immigrant to my mother's children. Because passion for your house has consumed me. The insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. I wept while I fasted. Even for that weeping I was insulted." Jesus shows how to give all, so that we can give all back to God. When we do, God completes creation's story through Jesus and us. After Jesus was raised from the dead, his followers remembered what he had said, and they believed. They believed the word that Jesus had spoken. We're not talking just about the temple on the Mount at that particular Passover celebration in the first century. Nor are we just talking about Jesus as the temple that will be raised, for he has been raised. It brings us to talk about us too. Do you remember this question that Paul asks in his first letter to the Corinthians? Don't you know that you are God's temple and God's Spirit lives in you? If someone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person, because God's temple is holy. Holy is what you are. What is holy cannot be destroyed. God raises up holy. Holy is what you are. And so, on this third Sunday in Lent, we hear God calling us to be what we are. And indeed, this is certainly true. Amen.